on? Welcome to another episode of SOFREP Radio. I am your lucky host to get to interview these two magnificent writers and historians, starting with Craig Reed and James Rife. James is a total historian, has written books on many things, and including the Ukraine conflict, which has been going on for about 6 months now. When you're listening to this, it's the year 2022. I'll just let you know. So for the last 6 months, we've been hearing about the conflict in Ukraine, and I'm going to bring on James and Craig to fill us in on why they're going back to the 800s. Why is Vladimir Putin trying to bring back Peter the Great and Catherine II the Great? Why is he obsessed with this? Please, now let's hear what you have to say. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. The relationship between Russia and Ukraine goes back to the Dark Ages in a lot of ways. And as Craig and I have talked about, it's really a tale of two cities between Moscow and Kiev. And around in the 9th century, Kiev was the cultural and social and economic center of the Slavic world. And Moscow was a rival. And ultimately, Kiev was cut short by the Mongols in the 13th century. So Moscow surpassed it. Long story short, Ukraine is a borderland between Central Europe and Eurasia. It's in the same geographic position as Poland. You got Russia to the east, and then the Germans, Austro-Hungarians, and Romanians to the west, so they're squeezed. So during its history, Ukraine has been controlled by the Poles, the Lithuanians, on and off by the Russians. And it's a messy, chaotic history. My background is in Russian and modern European history. It's what I studied in college, so I knew all this going into the war. But the long and short of it is Ukraine was a founding state of the Soviet Union in 1922. And the breakup in 1991 was traumatic for the Russians. And the Ukrainians had mixed feelings about it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. In the eastern part of the country, they're more Russian-based, whereas in the west, they're more open to the west, the Western Europe. So there's a split inside
more of that
Ukraine
European
itself.
style.
Exactly, and Putin has played on that. Of course, he's throwing in a lot of overtones from World War II and making his arguments that Ukraine somehow infested with Nazis, which is really not true. But that's how he's selling it to his own population. So this conflict goes back to Putin really in a way wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. He's always lamented the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he's fought smaller wars with Chechnya, Georgia, South Ossetia, and he's picked off pieces of them to rebuild that sphere of influence. So in the current conflict, which really began in 2014, when he engineered the secession of Donbass region.
Crimea. Okay, sure.
Crimea, and then Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, as they're called. And that just triggered the war because the Ukrainians counterattacked in what they called an anti-terrorist operation. It launched 8 years of low-grade warfare between the two sides. And that brings us to February 24th, in which Putin has engineered this wholesale invasion to try to take Ukraine whole hog, it looks like, at least a good chunk of it. So it's a really messy, chaotic history. It goes back 1,000 years. Ukraine has its own.
It sure does.
Ukraine has its own national identity, has its own language, has its own, its own culture. So there's a misperception out there among the general public that Ukraine has always been part of Russia. It has not. And so it's a sovereign country since 1991. And apparently Putin wants it back. So here we are.
Now, if I understand this correctly, I was reading through your book in 1954, it was given to, its own statehood, and it was annexed because, so it could be Ukraine just to get rid of the nuclear arms because they had so many, that 1,600, warheads or capable munitions. And they said, hey, we'll make you your own state. You agree to these terms, and they did. And Russia was supposed to have this, parlay. You're not supposed to mess with them. And then here comes Russia after they've agreed and lived up to their end of the deal to try to take it back. I just I'm baffled by it because it's like Mexico trying to come take Utah.
Yeah. And I think it's a calculation that Putin has made, that there is a treaty on the books, the Bucharest Memorandum, in which the United States and the United Kingdom, Britain, basically guaranteed Ukraine security if Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons. And Russia signed that treaty. And I think Putin has made a cynical calculation that he can, renege on that treaty and there'll be no consequences. He's found out, that that's not necessarily true. That hasn't happened. So... but yeah, Ukraine's been sovereign since 1991, the breakup of the Soviet Union. It's had its own problems. It's by no means pure as a driven snow. I mean, they've had a lot of their own corruption problems. They've had political instability. They've had a couple of revolutions. The most recent one was in 2013, 2014, which always precipitated the invasion of Crimea and then Donbass. Ukraine has had stability.
Well, and they had to go in and, recalculate their presidential elections just recently, like within the last 10, 15 years, to remove and replace or, just to stifle the argument of like there was corruption in the elections. And so then they put in a president, which is not the current one. Zelensky is not who we're talking. I think it starts with a Y. You probably know his name.
Viktor Yanukovych.
Yanukovych. Now, Yanukovych. Did he fairly get in, or did they put him in? Was he the fix, or was he the problem?
He was the problem. He was a long time Russia supporting politician. He had a lot of support in the Donbass region, and he was an ally of Vladimir Putin. And what actually precipitated this whole series of events that brought us to the current war was that he had agreed to sign an economic treaty with Western European nations. And then at the last moment, he reneged on that in favor of another treaty with the Eurasian nations. And that's when the revolt in November 2013, called the Euromaidan Revolution, broke out. And he was driven from power in February 2014. In fact, he fled in the middle of the night and went to Russia. The next day, the Ukrainian parliament stripped him of his office and declared him a traitor, and he's currently got an arrest warrant out for him in Ukraine. So he went to Russia. Has been buying his time over the last 8 years. In the meantime, Ukraine held a new election. I believe it's June 2014, and elected another president, Poroshenko. And then he was defeated in April 2019 by Vladimir Zelensky, the current president. So those elections were more or less free and fair. But of course, in Luhansk and Donetsk, being pro-Russia, having a strong Russian influence, they thought that the 2014 election was corrupt, so that gave them grounds upon which they supposedly succeeded. And there are a couple of referendums. It's debatable where the referendums were in good faith or had been engineered by Putin. That's been indeterminate at this point. But that precipitated, which at that point was a civil war. So, but yeah, 2014, Yanukovych fled the country, gave up his office, and so a new president was installed, and then he was defeated by Zelensky. So Zelensky is the lawfully elected president of Ukraine as of today.
And that is who we were withholding military arms, and the whole impeachment of our U.S. president was involved with Zelensky, where it was like, hey, you look into this fiasco for me, and I'll give you military aid, withholding that, knowing what was about to happen. And so now we have, so that's the same, that's who we're talking about. Currently, this Zelensky is still in office, and he's putting up a fight against Vladimir. He's literally like showing up in a sweater with a sleeve that has like a zipper for whatever he needs to store in it, and he's like ready to go. I think he's like 44 years old, and he's not afraid to use the internet.
Well, Zelensky, before he became president, he's actually a very successful actor and comedian in Ukraine. And he started as a teenager, and he built a career in the entertainment industry. He actually had a very successful series in Ukraine from 2015 to 2018 called Servant of the People, in which he played a history teacher who was frustrated and got elected president of Ukraine. And he used that as a springboard to run a real campaign in 2019
to become
the president. So So it's a lot like electing Jerry Seinfeld and having him
Or
as
Ronald
president,
Reagan.
or Ronald Reagan, an actor, which is
Or the last guy, Trump. He was an actor.
exactly.
He total actor, dude.
Yeah. So Zelensky actually, I think Putin calculated that he's a lightweight and that he was a pushover, and not many people took him seriously
Right.
because of that background. But when
Right.
he, on the night of the 24th, February 24th, when the Russians invaded, he said, "Send me ammunition. I don't need a ride." That showed, he actually had some steel in him. So,
He's like, I'm in the trenches,
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in the trenches. That's how I perceive him. If he's coming off like that and he's saying what he is, then hey, he's going to go down with the ship. He is that captain, and you need that captain to have that for your own fighters. Your fighters seeing him fighting is going to make them fight.
Right, Craig. Go ahead.
The night of the 24th, he went out onto the streets with his close staff and said, "I am here. Come get me." So he's taunting the Russians.
Now, Craig,
the Russians tried and failed miserably.
He has been antagonizing the Russians. He goes to places, shows up at places. He's like, you think I'm not in the Ukraine somewhere? You think I've fled to some other land who's trying to backdoor me as their puppet? He's like, no, I'm here at this building. Unfortunately, blowing up hospitals, and the prisons and things like that, it's just kind of a wrong thing to do. Geneva Conventions, they are not playing by any Geneva Conventions accord. I feel like, the Russian troops are just sporadically attacking as they're told to do so because of something their leadership has commanded them to do, right? It's either you go fight or you die. I've seen enemy at the gates, right? We know how it is. You pick up this rifle when he dies and there's your ammunition. You're going to go. And if you turn around, we're going to mow you down.
Well, compared to today's army, and the army of the gates was well led and trained. That's the one.
Well, there you go.
To take from this, that the Russian army today is not the Red Menace of the 1980s. It is a shadow of its 1980 power projection. I mean, all you had to do was look at the plan they came up with. It was this complicated plan, hit the Ukrainians from 4 different directions, take the capital, and war supposed to be over in 3 days. Guess what? They're still fighting. It shows you something really went wrong. And part of it is the Russian army, well, most of it's the Russian army. I mean, they lack infantry. They have infantry battalions that are maybe the size of a reinforced U.S. Marine Corps company.
That's the size.
Yeah, that's the size. What they're supposed to have is in the motorized infantry platoon, they have 3 APCs, 3 IFVs, and a dismounted element. So you've got 2 or 3 guys in the vehicle, then a dismounted element of 4 to 5. And some of those battalions, there is no dismounted element. It's just the guys in the vehicle. And that has caused some problems because their armor and infantry need each other. And what's happening is the armor is not getting the infantry protection.
Correct.
So you've got Ukrainians running around, popping up, firing a javelin or an NLAW, taking out a tank, and then boom, off again before the infantry can react. So that's the biggest thing I found, that the supply problems. Their supply problems are, remember the convoy from going nowhere? Sat there for days while bits and pieces were being picked off by Ukrainians who were running up and down the line, finding a target, firing, off again. They are, the biggest difference I think is the command style. After 2014, Ukrainians realized that their army, to be put blunt, sucked. So they turned to NATO and said, "Can you help us?" And that's
Exactly.
what NATO did. They helped them. They started teaching the junior officers to take initiative. Because still in the Russian army, your junior officers can't do anything. They got to get the go-ahead from up the line. Which is why you're seeing a lot of colonels and generals dead on the Russian side. Because they're coming up to try and solve problems that in a NATO army would be solved by majors and captains.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, forcing major generals to act as battalion commanders, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where the West came over and sent some Green Berets, perhaps, to work with the Ukrainians when the airliners were getting shot down by Russian, anti-aircraft. You just don't do that. And so all of a sudden, there's a need back then to say, okay, are they coming in? Are they trying to turn the oil off to Europe? Are they trying to take over Crimea? Are they trying to just cause that to be its own statehood so that they can say they own it? And it was never agreed to by Ukraine to be annexed. It's always been considered to be a part of Ukraine, but Russia considers it Russia. And then you have, okay, here comes some special forces guys coming in to help work with our allies. And they're going to say, hey, this is exactly how you use this piece of equipment. This is what's going to happen one day. You need to be prepared. Whereas what you're saying, Craig, if I understand this correctly, is Russia just kind of sat back, rested on its red laurels that it has and all of its history, and didn't uptrain themselves to prepare to move a convoy across the bridges. And if they got blown up, what do they do to resupply? Or if X, Y, and Z happens, how do they counter that measure? They're just kind of doing what the Germans did in World War II and surrounding themselves.
Yeah.
Well, the Russian supply is rail dependent. And in the early part of the war, not only did Ukrainians blow up all the entry points into Ukraine from Russia and Belarus, you also had Belarusians who were doing their own thing to sabotage the supplies coming in from Belarus into Ukraine. So the supply sucked, the command sucks, and leadership sucks. I mean, what level it's left. I mean, between generals and colonels, I think the U.S. lost one general in the 20 years fighting between Afghanistan and Iraq, and that was because it was a blue and blue situation. I just saw a couple of days ago that another 2 or 3 generals have been killed. Russian generals.
Yeah, I think just today, I think just today it's September 1st, so it's shelling going on around the nuclear plant in the Ukraine area. So they're currently under siege right there. And I mean, I'm not trying to poke a bear. Okay, I'm not trying to say, hey, someone's going to listen to this in Russia and be pissed at Rad having this conversation saying that you suck. All right, dude, look, you can stop. You can just stop the war, really. I mean, you can just stop, put your guns down, go home, go to your family. I'm really just saying that. Have some cookies and some milk and just end this whole thing. You can do that. If you listen to this somehow, I'm not trying to poke your bear and say you suck, okay? All right, you're under orders. I get it. We've all been under orders in our lives. So I think what we're trying to do is explain, just let Ukraine live as Ukraine and Russia can be Russia. But right now, it's looking really bad for Russia, right? All of Russia. It's Vladimir is preach. Go ahead. McDonald's is changing. Everything is changing over there. It's completely, falling apart.
Well, for the example, the Russian confidence, Chernobyl, it's right up there near the Belarusian border, so it was taken quickly because the Ukrainians just traded some shots and then just got the hell out of there because the last thing they wanted to do was to have a firefight around a crippled nuclear plant. with all the with everything that entailed. And the Russians came in and they proceeded to run up and down the fields, kicking up radioactive dirt. They dug trenches in the Red Forest, which is akin to like digging holes on top of where a nuclear bomb has just exploded. So
yeah, they slept in them. They lived in them. Oh.
And there was a report too
that
there was
stole material from this labs. So I mean, if it had been an American unit, they would no way would have done anything like that.
No, there'd already be a court case for radioactive trenches and exposure to veterans. That's what would already happen here. We'd already have like a VA study on why were our troops put into that situation. You know, the Russian soldiers have nothing like that to support them if they go into some type of situation to have to get radioactive treatment. They're going to go to their VA? Really?
Well,
what were you going to say, James?
Early on, there was a report, and it was unverified, but there's probably a ring of truth in it, that there were a couple of busloads of Russian soldiers who'd been sent to a special radiation unit in Minsk in Belarus, which was a staging area for the Russians, and they were suffering from radiation poisoning from being in that environment. So, and a lot of these Russian soldiers are conscripts, 17, 18, 19-year-old boys. And they had no clue what they were getting into. They've been, the reports that they'd been lied to. They thought they were on maneuvers. They weren't even sure where they were at until they crossed the border. So, when they were ordered to dig in at Chernobyl, I'm sure once they got there, they realized where it was at. I mean, everybody knows what Chernobyl looks like. But the fact that they were put into that, it's complete disregard of their soldiers' lives, which, that's par for the course in Russian history in the Russian military. So... But yeah,
that's just like there should be some cause for concern with that young 18-year-old future leader to be put into a radiation-filled hole and basically buried alive. You hear me, Russian soldier? You should just totally go home.
Well, they're doing it again at Zaporizhzhia, which is, of course, is now under siege, being shelled with the International Atomic Energy inspectors supposedly arriving today, but the Russians are stalling that. So that plant's being shelled, and the question is, who's shelling it? Of course, the Russians are saying it's Ukrainians, which doesn't make much sense, but it is what it is. So, but the Russians, the Russians, and I made this point to another friend earlier in the week, the Russians are fighting a 20th century war against the 21st century Ukraine. And what Craig said was absolutely right. After 2014, the Ukrainian military performed really poorly. They went to NATO, asked for help, got new training, new tactics, some new weapons, particularly the Javelin missiles and the MAD-PADs, and it revolutionized their own military and moved away from the old Soviet tactics of the 1980s. So the Russians came, it came as a complete shock to them when they moved into Ukraine across 4 fronts that the Ukrainians weren't fighting like they expected them to. And in fact, they were using small unit tactics and special forces to basically jam up the entire invasion force. I saw a story earlier last week in the Washington Post, and that one 2,000-man Ukrainian brigade actually stopped 30 of those battalion tactical groups on the road to Kiev just by using creative small unit tactics. And it was a buzzsaw effect. And the Russians started, they fell back into these World War II type tactics of, trying to do human wave attacks against these really well-positioned, 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers who were motivated. And they were just highly maneuverable. They were just, shoot and run and gun. And the Russians stopped them cold in their tracks outside of Kiev. They never recovered from that. So, the Ukrainians used that 8-year period from 2014 to 2022 to great effect. And, the Russians haven't really been able to figure out how to handle them except just by reverting back to World War II and even World War I type artillery barrage tactics. So.
Right. It's like what Craig was saying. I think Craig said it was like supposed to be 3 days. Putin was like, we're going to be in. They're going to welcome us with open arms. We're going to roll in. And no, it's not that at all. You just effed around and found out. And that's, I live my life with that motto. So I will find out what happens when I F around with it. But they're learning. When you F around with it, you're finding out. And that's what's happening. And those people are not giving up. The youth the educated, they're willing to pick up arms and die. They're reality stars. They're singers of bands that are popular, have been going to battle and trying to come on TikTok and like say, hey, we're out here, we're fighting, we just want you to know, and they're dying. The MMA fighter that just died, that's a Ukrainian superstar. You know, he was found to be killed in action. And then today, September 1st, I read on the public headlines of all the media groups that some prominent oil executive was just fallen out of a window in Russia's hospital and died.
Yeah,
he just walked right out of a window and fell and died. The oil guy, the guy in charge of all of the oil at a hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that story. I don't even know. Which is that tends to be a trend with Putin. Anybody criticizes him or becomes a political enemy, they tend to die or disappear. And in this case, supposedly fell out of a hospital sixth floor hospital window, and I call it Putin sciatic. So,
Putin sciatus or something, man. It's a disease. You don't want that.
So. But yeah, I mean,
were you going to say something, Craig?
Yeah, I was also say that in addition, the war in Donbass region in the last 8 years has basically turned out veteran soldiers. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these guys go in, they spend their tour in the Donbass region getting shot at, and then they go back to their regular lives. So when the war comes, you've got all these people who know what it's like to be shot at and shoot at people. So a lot of territorial defense battalions, they stood up. A lot of partisans. They're all veterans. They know how to fight. And just looking at the way the Russians do things, the Russians don't.
Right. No, they just don't have that same thing going on. They didn't get up trained. And what were you going to say, James?
Well, to add what Craig said, in the Ukrainian army, he's absolutely right. They have a cadre of veterans from the 8 years of war in Donbass, whereas in the Russian military, it's 1 year and out. That you're conscripted, you do your 1 year of service, and then you return home. As opposed, they also have aside from the conscripts, they also have what they call the contract soldiers. These are guys who are signed on after that 1 year obligation's over. They become the NCOs and such. But they're a much smaller cadre. So the Russians have not had the same level of veteran experience in war fighting because they lost most of their conscripts who returned home. Unlike the Ukrainians, whose conscripts went home, but now they can return easily to the battlefield. The Russians don't have that advantage like the Ukrainians do. It's a home field advantage, essentially.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, 100%. And they're trying to pull the prisoners out of jail saying, hey, you want to fight or die, like a Dirty Dozen scenario. You have this ultimate mission ahead of you. Yeah, it's like, he's like, hello, come fight or die. You're one way or another. You're going to be in jail or you're going to be, in the military, which is their jail. I just...
55 million, well, come on in, we can use you.
Exactly.
The Third Army Corps just stood up.
Well, what's it going to take for the people of Russia and Ukraine to change their political structure so that Putin's out of it, maybe like even legitimately where he's just elected out? How can we get the Russians to see the Ukrainians as just their neighbors, maybe, their family on both sides, but that's what they are. It's like family on both sides and they're fighting it. How do we, I don't know, how do we just tell them like, you got to...
You're breaking up, Craig.
Russian people are being lied to.
There you go.
Okay, the Russian people are being lied to. They're being told that the Ukrainians are Nazis and they have to go in and clean them out, which is funny because Zelensky lost relatives in the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
So he's about as anti-Nazi as you can get. But like I said, the Russians are being lied to, and Putin doesn't have any challengers. Anyone he thinks is a threat to him ends up going through a window 6 stories up, mm-hmm. or dying
or like
from
Navalny,
a nerve agent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or up in jail. So if anyone's going to take out Putin, it's going to have to be one of the oligarchs or a mix of them. It right now. Trying to get Putin out of there, you're going to need a big stick of dynamite.
To add to that, I've got both Russian and Ukrainian friends, so I get both perspectives.
Sure.
And starting with the Russians have on their national psyche, they have 1,000 years of authoritarian rule and existence, pretty much going back to the Mongols, going back to the Tsars. It's imprinted on the Russian psyche. So there's this culture of fear. I've noticed that, ever since Yeltsin in 1991 disestablished the Soviet Union, they had a taste of freedom. They were obviously enjoying it, but then Putin starts cracking down, particularly with censorship and passing laws that if you criticize the war or the military, you could get a lengthy prison sentence. They've sort of fallen back into that old Soviet citizen mindset that, you don't dare criticize the government or else you'll end up in a Siberian gulag. I mean, that's what sort of surprised me about the Russians. I thought they would actually have a stronger homegrown resistance to what Putin's doing. It was there at the start, but then he crushed it within a week. And since then, it's been silence. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, they have had a very healthy transference back between Ukraine and Western Europe and to the United States. That's how I've met my Ukrainian friends. So they've got a good, healthy dose of Western democracy and freedom. And they've brought that home with them, and it motivates them to fight for, the freedom of their country. They don't want to be a part of Russia. They don't want any more dictatorship. They want to be able to, to basically establish their own national identity, which they've done, and chart their own path in the world as a sovereign country. They were, corruption aside and the problems with the, the two revolutions, the Orange Revolution and the Euromaidan Revolution, they were on that path. But now the Russians, though, have come and sort of disrupted that, and it's a completely different perspective with the Westernized Ukrainians as opposed to the Russian population, which is sort of dropping back into that Eastern Tsarist mindset. So it's a really weird dynamic. Very much a 20th century versus 21st century. 20th century versus 21st century dynamic going on here between the two populations.
Well, and that's another reason, just to call your book out for those that are joining us right now. Let me just shout out your book real quick. I believe you're calling it the Russian-Ukraine War Fact Book. What's the exact title? Because you've put a lot of time into this. What's the name of that book?
Well, it's backwards here on the screen, but it's the Russia-Ukraine War Fact Book. And
it is exactly the Russian-Ukraine War Fact Book. And that's being put out right now, and you're going to be able to check that out, if you're listening to this podcast. And it has a lot of things going on, and it's cool because it's got a lot of pictures. I'm not going to lie. I like the pictures. They complement it, as graphic as they are, to know that that's within the last 6 months of combat, seeing tanks blown up in the square of Kiev that are like rusted and burnt out.
Yeah.
It seems like it's been there forever, know? And so, as you're flipping through the pages on the video, to the listener out there, you should just check this book out. Go find it. It's the Ukraine. Let me just make sure I say the name exactly correct. Russian-Ukraine War Fact Book. All right. And that has been co-written by Craig up here and James that we're talking to. And they're very accurate and they know all about this. This is their theater of operation, if you will. And so that's why we're talking all Ukraine. So if you're just joining us right now, welcome aboard to the SOFREP Radio. And again, Ukraine can continue the fight, continue to push back against Russia, but for how long?
That's a $64,000 question. Go ahead, Craig.
And I know there's two of you here, so go ahead, Craig. Let's give Craig a second. Go ahead.
I think Ukrainians won't be happy until every single Russian is out of Ukraine territory. And that includes Crimea. I've seen enough interviews. These soldiers, they have not wavered. They're calling the Russians orcs. That's their nickname for them. and they'll call them Russian Mordor.
Oh, I
So-
see.
It's a Tolkien reference.
As far as
The orcs.
Yeah.
Russian
Oh, yeah.
orcs.
Yeah. Russian orcs and Mordor, and so the Ukrainians see themselves as the true. They're going to stay. They don't want to change. They're ready to fight to the death.
yeah,
Jeez.
yeah.
Well,
and
why
then-
would they
and
not?
they-
I mean,
yeah,
that's what
Well-
America did. America
Yeah,
said, we
but
will
they're
not be you. We fought the British and fought and fought and fought. And people were like, you should just stay. Some people probably in America were like, why are we fighting? Why are we fighting? Why are we fighting them? This is a good life. I have a good life. And someone over there's like, I don't want to pay any more taxes. I mean, we fought as Americans for our own, independence. I don't see that same drive in a human being being given up if they have made that dedication. And that's Ukraine to me.
Well, Ukraine considers the Russians, rightfully so, as an existential threat. I mean, it's a threat to their existence as a sovereign country. And this, again, goes back to thousands of years of history between the two countries. And, the question is, how long can they last? Well, they can last as long as they keep the ammunition supplies going. I mean, they found their weapon systems. They got the tactics. They've got the drones. That's the really impressive thing. They got these commercial drones that they've done some field modification to that can drop hand grenades into open hatches of tanks and such and blow them up. So that they've got the know-how. It's just they need the ordnance to keep to keep fighting. And that's the larger question is, I have this debate with a lot of my friends. Why should we care? It's in Europe. How does this affect us? Why should we support Ukraine? Why are we spending $40 billion to supply the Ukrainians?
To help them,
And the answer is, this feels a lot. Craig and I were talking before, we went live. This feels a lot like the summer of 1939 with Putin in the role of Hitler. And if you don't stop him now, what happens next? And if we don't stop him now, do we get a bigger war of NATO? Do the Russians make a move on the Baltics? Do they make a move on Alaska? I've heard some Russian politicians, claim that, hey, Alaska's really ours because they really resent giving away all that oil to us. So
Correct.
where does it end if you don't stop them now? And it's better to fight a proxy war with the Ukrainians, supplying the manpower and the motivation to fight, if we can arm them from our stores. That way our boys don't have to fight. Our kids don't have to die in a foreign war. So that's the debate I have with a lot of my friends who say, why should we care? This is not our fight. Really, it is our fight. If you don't fight now, when do you fight? When they show up on your shores.
It's too late at that point.
Yes.
You don't want them here. It's too late.
Right.
Then to wait 5 years.
If it shows
and
up here.
Fight in Germany.
Yep. Right. Pushing into what then? Yeah, then what? All of a sudden strategic strikes going on around like Ramstein Air Base. All these different things, all these scenarios, the doomsday clock could be ticking if we don't do something. And that is exactly what we're trying to do is sniff out the fuse. We've all seen the cartoon where the fuse is going along and they just come over and just put it out with their fingers. That's what we're trying to do here by helping to do that. Because if it comes to your shores, who's listening to this right now, it's too late. Okay? And if you're over there fighting and you're listening to this, Godspeed and safe travels. I don't know what else to tell you. Just do your best. And you have support, all right, for freedom. And that's my opinion. I'm going to say that right now. I got nothing but support. If you're either with them or you're a communist. Sorry.
Correct.
It's like you're either like, what are you? What are you?
There's a larger context here too. That Ukraine-Russian, the war is only one part of the world. We also have to keep our eye on the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, as well as the Iranians versus Iraq and Saudi Arabia. There's trouble going on that we've sort of taken our eye off that in looking at what's going on in Europe. But China has built this huge blue water navy.
Or you could call it West Taiwan if you want, because they choose to call their, you can say, oh, you mean West Taiwan? Huh? How about that? Why don't we say that, because how about that? Oh, you mean West Taiwan? Yeah, right there. How about West Taiwan?
And the reason for it, a lot of people don't understand that Taiwan is a rival government that was pushed off the mainland during China, in 1949. It wasn't captured. and they retreat to Taiwan. They maintained a coherent, sustainable government. So it's a rival government
Correct.
to the communist government in Beijing. That's why the Chinese, the Red Chinese, are desperate to stamp it out, because that threat is always there that the Taiwanese or the nationalist government, formerly of Chiang Kai-shek, would come back one day and overthrow them and reestablish national rule in China. So you have that piece there. And then, of course, what's going on in the Middle East, chaos. Apparently we just lost Baghdad earlier in the week. So there's the makings of a true Third World War going on right now that if we don't stop it, it can engulf the entire country. And we not, it's on us and we can't stop it.
No, and the thing is that, that's why we're showing who we are. We're saying we're here to defend those that are looking for that defense. I believe Finland and some others just joined NATO. Okay, so, Sweden, thank you very much. And, a lot of folks don't realize, maybe they do. I'm just assuming that, it goes all the way back to like Norsemen, right? Like you got Vikings, you've got Mongols, you've got, the Ottoman Empire, you have, the Russians trying to fight over the same place. It can go back to being the Mongolians if it should. If Putin wants to give up Russia, give it back to, who had it in 600, right? So like, where does he get off? Yeah, right. Where does he get off saying he wants it back in the Russian Empire when it should be back to, Prometheus? Give me a break.
Well, it's a completely arrogant argument on his part, because Russia's never been monolithic anyway. Russia has grown from what was used to be the Grand Duchy of Moscow to taking over other surrounding city-states and independent states like Kazan, Kazakhstan, even the Mongolia. Mongolia became a socialist republic in its own right in the 1920s, 1930s. So, but, Russia has never been monolithic. It's always had, it's got a different number of languages, ethnic groups, and such. So it's not a unified country at all. It's been held together by force of will by its rulers and by military force, pure, raw military force. So
right. And it's amazing how they can just keep control over their country with technology that just wants to ooze into their lives and say, hey, this is what's going on in the world. But somehow they're able to block all that out and just funnel just their information to these huge masses of people that really, that's all I got. Just a big sigh.
It's complicated. It'll give you a headache.
Yeah.
A headache inducing just trying to think about all the dynamics at play here and what it could possibly lead to if people don't, really read their history and, and take an interest in current events and where all this is heading. I mean, it could blow up really easily into a Third World War, and we need to do everything we can
it really
to
could
stop that.
We do. And I think, go, yes, please, Craig.
Well, what I was going to say is, looks like at one time the Nagorno-Karabakh war was going to start up again.
Mm-hmm.
That down in Armenia and Azerbaijan, they're fighting over this little territory. That's
it's in the
and that
Caucasus
came to
Mountains.
our attention because of the drones. Because of the drones, both sides don't have much of an air force, so they're using drones in place of the air force. They're using the Spot. They're using Azerbaijan's using the Bakhtars as strike aircraft to take out Armenian positions, which is what attracted both of us to that. And we wrote an article, and that ended up in naval proceedings.
A drone article
for January.
Oh.
And that's the story of how we did this book in the first place. Craig and I were sort of, doing a recap. And the conflict you alluded to, the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, it's another one of these ancient, hostile nationalist states.
Genocide.
Yeah. It goes back to the Ottoman Empire. The Turks are involved.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1994, they fought a war that the Armenians won. The Azerbaijanis, it's a Muslim country, and it's backed by the Turks, have been plotting their revenge all these years. So in October 2020, Azerbaijan attacked Armenia and won that war in about 6 weeks. And they did it by using drone technology. And it was a game changer. Very few people actually paid attention to it. I see it in the news occasionally, but Craig and I took an interest in it. And we realized, hey, this is going to change warfare. So we got together, and Craig and I, we wrote an article for the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings, which is this, New Wrinkle in Drone Warfare. And we made some predictions that when large-scale conflict eventually happens, drones are going to change the battlefield. Boy, were we right. And actually, when the Russians invaded, we were planning to write a follow-up to this article. So that's what got us onto this way of thinking that modern warfare is changing, and it's becoming more lethal. We're approaching a Terminator-type scenario with
less
artificial
personal
intelligence, facial recognition technology. You match that up with drone technology. Essentially, you get sentient robots on the battlefield, and we've seen this to a certain extent in Ukraine with these hunter-killer drones chasing individual Russian soldiers around the battlefield. So we're there. The future is here, and once someone figures out how to mass manufacture drones and make them smaller, you got millions of drones roving the battlefield. That's terrifying.
It's completely terrifying, actually, and
You're
because there's there's nothing to stop the RoboCop's mindset when it's already programmed. It's like its initiatives are to kill or coming with me, dead or alive. It's that whole mindset. There's no human interaction, unfortunately. Like in RoboCop, he remembers who he is. He's like, I'm Murphy. I'm not a human. I'm not a robot. But these robots don't know that. They're just like, 100 of them get shot out, but one of them does its job, and that sucks.
The Terminators.
Exactly.
Drone swarms, they're using them for displays. They did that at the Olympics, showing having the drones go around in patterns. So it's not that hard to go from that to having a swarm of drones attack a target.
No.
Yeah.
No, I've
Have to be very big.
And there's a there's a whole other Sorry, Craig.
That's all right. But they can overwhelm any defenses. And the scary thing is, what if you want to take out, say, a leader? You don't have to send an assassin team. You send a couple of guys with enough drones, and they can do a job for you. Or suicide drones, which are basically missiles that loiter over the battlefield to have a target, and then they dive bomb it. And these things.
That's what I was saying. 1 out of 500.
Yeah, one's gonna get through.
The Israelis have one.
Yeah, it's just that one.
Has like a pound forehead.
So
imagine.
Okay, so this is like Marvel Universe. Now that I think about it, there's a movie out right now with Marvel, and they're like all these drones are attacking the aircraft carrier in the sky, and they're just like fighting. And drone technology is just like, we need Iron Man for that.
Well, wait till we get to Ultron.
Oh my gosh.
Age of Ultron.
Yeah, no, really. I mean, seriously. Now, you guys have been a great resource for talking, and I really like ping-ponging all of this type of information and going back and forth. I didn't realize what I knew about Ukraine until I started talking with you today, and I'm just like, what about this and that? And then all of a sudden, everything I learned in history, all the things my teachers taught me start flooding back into, like, so many people have ruled the Russian area, that whole Asia. It's Asia, that's what it is. A lot of people forget that. It's Asia.
Right.
And China wants it all.
Ukraine's the biggest.
Let's talk about China wants it all. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, there's an element, too, that we touch on in the book, but we'll never really know the true story for a few years. That's going to be the intelligence and the clandestine war that's going on right now. And we know that there's a lot of satellite use going on. They saw that 40-mile long convoy. In fact, there's a private company that contracted the governor that spied the convoy. They were able to track it and attack it before it got to Kiev. But we also know that the intelligence services, special forces are involved. Ukraine obviously has their own special forces. They have a Spetsnaz just like the Russians do. And there's been some inexplicable things going on in the Black Sea area, particularly around Saki Air Base, around the Crimea. So there's also this enormous intelligence, covert operations war that's going on. We don't know the particulars right now, and it's that's going to be a game-changing piece of the conflict too. And we'll probably find out 10 years from now exactly what happened when things start becoming declassified or someone writes the definitive history of it. So that's a pretty fascinating element too. I would love to have more information on that, but of course, for operational security, you're never going to get it. But that's something to keep in mind.
No. This book was designed to give to someone who didn't know anything about the war. Yeah. This is the first phase. Yeah. This is basically up to about April the 7th or so. And it's designed to give someone who doesn't know what the heck's going on, give them an idea, give them a solid understanding. I mean, it's not deep as into the weeds, but it gives you enough to understand, okay, this is why the Russians failed. Mm-hmm. This is what happened here. And like I said, it's just to give you an understanding of what's going on. We don't have the resources to go deep. Right. That's going to be up to other military historians who have access to stuff we don't. Yeah. Who'll be able to write the definitive.
Yeah.
Right.
But like I said, this is understanding of the first phase of the war. Now, we're working on at least 2 more volumes coming up. Second one covers from April up to the capture of Southern Nest. Is that what we agreed on?
It goes from February. It goes from February 24th to April 7th, and that's first phase. That's when the Russians are pulled. Yeah, that was first phase. And then there was an operational pause. Then the Moskva got hit in the Black Sea, the Russian Black Sea fleet's flagship. That's the beginning of phase 2. So we're in about phase 4 right now. And when we started writing this in mid-April, we decided, right around the time the Moscow was hit, that we need to do this. And it was going to be a handy reference guide. It wasn't going to be comprehensive. It's not academic. We didn't want to put out a 400-page tome that nobody's going to read.
Right, you want something that had visuals and straight to the point knowledge and why they've been at war and why they're in war and why Putin thinks he needs it and why Ukraine thinks they want it, and it's really straightforward. I mean, I kind of perused it pretty quickly, and I guess that's probably also I'm going to consider you one of my history teachers now, so thank you.
All right. Hey. That's what I used to do in a former life. I was a history teacher, so that's why I taught.
Well, perfect. I'm going to tell you right now something funny. I was in special ed, and I know a lot of people will believe that, okay? But I had 2 teachers. So having both of you on here with me right now, helping me understand a little more, I really appreciate that to you. I just want to let you know. So.
Hey, it's our pleasure. So, and that, that's the whole point of the exercise is, to help people understand what's going on. And here's, the facts, and it's easily digestible. And we take a messy history and try to make it, at least, somewhat understandable.
Right. See, everybody thinks like you have to be, some type of special forces or special operations to host this show. No, bro. Special ed. That's what's up right here, okay? I'm going to tell you right now, okay? We all bleed the same blood at the end of the day. I promise you that.
That's right.
And I want to say to my friends listening in, Moscow, we all bleed the same blood. And to my friends in the Ukraine, we all bleed the same blood. And I'm over here in Utah. I stand with No More War. I work for a company that brings media and journalism from that type of situation, and we see so much of it that I'm down to see it calming. So I really appreciate having both of you on the show. And James and Craig, let's go with James first. I'm going to give you a second to maybe say your book or a link or where anybody can check out maybe something that you're a part of. Mm-hmm. And then Craig, once he's done, I'll let you have a moment to say the same thing or agree, etc.
Yeah, the Russia-Ukraine War Fact book was released on Tuesday. It's available at our website, militaryminiaturepress.com. Really easy to find. Just Google Military Miniature Press, and this is our little advertisement and such. So it's also available on Amazon.com. Just do a title search for it, and it will come right up. So we hope it's a nice reference guide for people who need to understand the war but are having problems with the history.
Sure.
Yeah.
Craig.
As for me, I'm writing other things. I'm working on the volume 2 now. We're working on it, and well, I write other things. I write for the BattleTech gaming line. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's just basically.
I see it on your wall, and I was going to bring it up.
With giant stompy robots. Sort of like
yes.
Sort of like Game of Thrones.
Like GoBots.
Sci-fi Game of Thrones with giant stompy robots.
BattleTech.
That's the way to describe it without
yes.
Going into too much detail. So I've got another novel coming out, and that line should be out sometime soon. I don't know exactly when. But I'm working on volume 2. Looks like, and putting together outline for volume 3.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know if this contact's going to be volume 3 or volume 4. We have to decide on that.
Yeah, we don't know how the war's going to end at this point. We do know that there's
that's what I was going to say.
Follow-on books. As we can identify when a specific stage or phase of the war ends, we can actually add to it. Now, and there'll be short books, 48 pages, 64 max, to add on to this.
Sure.
To sort of bring them update. Kind of like a source book. In the gaming world, you have the core source book, and then you have supplementals. That's how we envision running this series in the future.
I love it. I love it because I'm a gamer, and it makes sense to me to do that. You're like, here you go. And again, that's why I have a hard time dating my podcasts when I talk on them, because I want them to kind of be just, when you listen to it, it's like we're talking now, but this is real. This is today. It's September 1st, 2022, and there's a war going on in Ukraine against Russia, and we're talking about it. And I have had the pleasure to talk with Craig Reed and James Rife, who have authored the book that we've talked about today. Let me just make sure I say it one more time correctly, which is the Russian-Ukraine War Fact book that can be found on Amazon. And I just want to wind down our show and say thanks for dedicating an hour of your time to talk to myself and my listener, and those that are viewing this. Thanks for commenting down below and all that stuff you do when you subscribe and hit that button. I also want to give a shout out to SOFREP for going on its 10-year anniversary this month of September. Congratulations to SOFREP and Brandon Webb and everybody that's been a part of SOFREP. This episode right here will be played during that month of September. So thanks for being a part of our 10-year anniversary podcast. I'm very privileged to have been the first person to launch SOFREP with Brandon on video 2012. I'd like, hey, so you're Brandon Webb. He's like, yeah, you're rad. I was like, so what do you got going on? He's like, SOFREP. And I was like, let's be friends. And we've been friends ever since. So I want to say thank you to B Webb and everybody who's come along in my life in this 10-year journey. And I look forward to future endeavors with everybody out there. So again, James and Craig, you guys have been a pleasure. I totally know what BattleTech is. I love talking to you guys. So we will catch you on the flip side. And this is Rad saying peace.
Peace.